Happy day. I am Rekha from Department of Communication and Media Studies, BSc Electronic Media. Today I will be handling the basics of communications. So, what do you think? Communication is all about like interacting with one another, like talking to each other, communicating through words, visuals or like that. So, it is a simple way of act of information and transform of information. So, we have two types of communications. One is a verbal communications and other one is a non-verbal communications. So, we will be seeing first verbal communication. So, verbal communication means it is through words we express the feelings or through writings we express through the written words. So, in verbal communications also we have a different types of verbal communications, that is one is written communications, other one is a oral communications. Oral communication defines that it through words you express your feelings, what type of informations you have to pass through the audiences. Written communication is through posters like wordings, through visuals or something you want to communicate the meanings to the visual audiences. Next is like advantages of the verbal communication is like when you talk immediately the messages will not be miscommunicated. So, the words and meanings will be directly communicated to the audiences, the meanings will not be interpreted. Next is through sometimes the listeners can have, you can have a direct interact of the listeners when you communicate orally. So, communicating through words or written or spoken through a verbal communications, through that the informations will be clearly passed on to the audiences, there will be no interactions or there will be no misleading of the informations to the audiences. Then the other advantages is it can have a face to face interactions. In verbal communications we will have a face to face interactions where the audience will be like communicating, watching through the eyes of us, the messages will be directly communicated to the audiences. Next is there is a process of exchange of the informations from one person to another persons with the proper meanings. There will be a disadvantages. Sometimes when you talk through words, the words also can hurt them in any ways, the mislead the also. Then it can be forgotten easily. When you have like written words or something, the words can be forgotten easily. Types of non-verbal communication is like body postures, gestures, for emotions, like through facial expressions itself we can express their feelings, what they actually we need to communicate it. When you look sad your faces will be down and dull, you can easily identify the opposite person is bad. When you can also communicate like your dressing sense also, that also admires like where you are going, like culturally admired. It is like when you are going to temple or something, like you will be dressed in Indian attire. When you are going for some shopping or like western, it also determines, that also terms as a non-verbal communications. Types of non-verbal communication means it is a verbal communication is a formal communications. In non-verbal communication, sometimes verbal communications it involves also a personal talks like friends and all, like that also involves. In most of the cases in non-verbal communications don't use words, we don't use words for communicating anything, or by like by some other modes are used like body gestures, like emotions, signals, signs and symbols like postures, images will be used for the non-verbal communications. So, there is a difference between the verbal and non-verbal communications. Like verbal communications we will have more formal and more like gestures, like we will be communicating through the audiences to the words or some written words or oral communications through words or something. So, in non-verbal communications we will be communicating the audience through the emotions, feelings like body expressions, facial expressions, body postures, through our dressing sense or through the way of emotions we will be expressing to the messages to the audiences. So, this is the types of communications. So, communication is a simple act of information transforming from one person to another person. So, we have seen the different types of communications, like what is non-verbal communications and what is verbal communication. So, what the communication is actually is all about. Communication is a simple act of communicating through informations to the audiences from one person to another person. So, in verbal communications we have oral words or written words which will be communicated to the audiences, but in non-verbal communications we will be communicating the messages to the audiences through body gestures, through facial expressions, through our emotions and feelings, through the culturally adapted attire also. So, this is the information about the what the communications is. It is the basics of the communications. Thank you. Do like, subscribe MOP Classroom.